I'll never forget the moment I opened that letter. It was a Tuesday afternoon, one of those days where the sun was shining but the weight in your chest made everything feel darker. I had just come home from work, exhausted, my shirt still clinging to my back with the sweat of a long day. My kids were sitting at the kitchen table, hunched over their homework, and my wife was preparing dinner, humming softly like she always did when she tried to keep the house calm. The envelope was sitting there in the pile of mail. White, plain, with the bold stamp of the Homeowners Association at the corner. At first, I didn't think much of it. The HOA always sent reminders, notices, sometimes newsletters filled with things nobody cared about, like which neighbor's lawn won Yard of the Month or some new parking rule. But when I opened it, my entire world tilted. Effective immediately, HOA dues will increase from $400 per month to $750 per month due to recent legal expenses incurred by the association. I blinked. Read it again and again. My throat went dry. $750? I whispered, almost choking on the number. My wife turned around, spatula still in hand, her brow furrowed. "What is it?" she asked. I handed her the letter without a word. She read it, her lips moving silently, her hand trembling. When she finished, she looked at me like she was seeing a ghost. They can't do this, right? They can't just raise it that much overnight?" she stammered. But I knew they could. This HOA wasn't just any HOA. It was ruled, no, controlled by Karen Mitchell, the president of the board. Karen wasn't just strict. She was ruthless. She lived for this HOA. She loved the power, the authority, the ability to make people's lives miserable if they dared cross her. For her, the HOA wasn't about keeping the neighborhood pretty or maintaining property values. It was about control. And now, thanks to some lawsuit the HOA lost, because of her mismanagement, I might add, we were all paying the price. That night, my wife and I sat at the kitchen table after the kids went to bed. The letter lay between us, like a bomb that had already gone off. "We can't afford this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I rubbed my face with my hands. "That's nearly $400 extra a month. We're already stretching everything. Between the mortgage, groceries, utilities. Where the hell are we supposed to find that?" She shook her head. "We'll drown." And she was right. My paycheck barely covered our essentials. Her part-time income helped, but not enough to cover a sudden hit like this. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled hard. This is Karen's doing. She pushed that lawsuit, she lost, and now she's passing the debt to us. She doesn't care who it hurts. The anger bubbled in my chest, because this wasn't just about money. This was about power, about a woman who thrived on making other people feel small. And I knew this was just the beginning. The next day, the neighborhood was buzzing. At the school drop-off line, other parents whispered about it. At the community park, people were grouped in little circles, clutching their HOA letters, shaking their heads. I overheard one man say, "I'll have to pull my kid out of daycare. That's the only way we'll make it." Another woman muttered, "I might have to sell. We can't stay here if it's like this." Everyone was furious. Everyone except Karen. At that week's HOA meeting, she sat at the head of the table with her perfect blonde bob, her pearl necklace, and that smug smile plastered across her face, like she had just won some kind of game. When one of the residents, a father of three named Richard, stood up and demanded answers, Karen leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "The board voted unanimously on this increase. We were forced into a lawsuit we didn't ask for. We lost. Legal fees are expensive. This community must pay its share. If you don't like it, you're welcome to put your house on the market." The room erupted. People shouted, some cursed, some even stormed out. But Karen didn't flinch. She thrived on the chaos. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up and forced myself to stay calm. This increase is impossible for many of us. You're asking families to choose between paying HOA fees and paying for groceries. That's not sustainable. You're pushing people out of their homes. Karen tilted her head, gave me that fake sweet smile that I had grown to hate. Mr. Parker, isn't it? You chose to buy a home in this community. You knew the rules. If you can't afford it, perhaps this neighborhood isn't the right fit for your family anymore. The words stung like a slap. My fists clenched at my sides. I wanted to scream, to tell her she was a parasite feeding off everyone's misery. But instead, I swallowed my rage and sat back down. Because deep down, I knew this was war, and Karen wasn't gonna fight fair. Over the next week, the pressure started building. Bills piled up, we cut back on everything, canceled subscriptions, stopped eating out, clipped coupons like crazy, but even then the math didn't add up. One night, as I sat staring at our budget spreadsheet, I felt my chest tighten. For the first time in years, I thought, what if we lose the house? The house where my kids had grown up, the backyard where we grilled burgers in the summer, the kitchen where my wife and I shared quiet cups of coffee before the chaos of the day. I felt like I was watching it all slip through my fingers. And Karen? She kept turning the screws. She sent out letters reminding residents of late fees. She drove around the neighborhood like a hawk, snapping pictures of lawns that weren't trimmed to her liking, or cars parked a few inches too far from the curb. Then came the first real blow. A knock at my door. When I opened it, 2 police officers were standing there. "Sir," one said politely, "we received a complaint from the HOA about some kind of code violation. Something about an unapproved structure in your backyard." My jaw nearly hit the floor. "Are you serious? It's a kid's swing set." The officers exchanged glances, clearly embarrassed. "We have to respond to all complaints, sir. Just letting you know it's been reported." I stood there dumbfounded as they walked away. My kids peeked out from behind me, confused. That's when it hit me. Karen was escalating. She wasn't just raising fees. She was targeting us. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the fan, my mind racing. I turned to my wife, who was awake too, staring into the dark. I whispered, "She won't stop. She wants us gone." She didn't respond right away. Then finally she said, "Then we have to fight back." Her voice was steady, stronger than mine even. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about money anymore. This was about survival, about standing up to someone who thought she could bully us out of our own home. And I made a silent promise to myself. I wasn't going to let Karen win. But little did I know, the war had only just begun. I wish I could tell you that things got better after that first week, that somehow, after the shock of the fee increase, people banded together, pushed back, and forced Karen to back down. But the truth is, things only got worse. The morning after the police came about the swing set, I felt humiliated. My kids looked at me differently, not because they thought I'd done something wrong, but because they saw the fear in my eyes. That fear ate at me. When I drove to work, every house I passed felt like a reminder of what we were about to lose. I'd see neighbors' yards with for sale signs popping up like weeds, good families, people I'd waved to every day for years, suddenly packing up their lives. And each time a family left, I knew Karen had won. She was thinning the herd, pushing out the ones who couldn't bend to her rules. At dinner that night, my wife broke the silence. "We can't keep living like this," she said, pushing her plate away. The kids are scared. I'm scared. You're barely sleeping." "I know," I muttered. "But what's the alternative? Just sell the house and run?" "That's exactly what she wants." She looked at me with tired eyes. "Sometimes running isn't losing. Sometimes it's survival." Her words cut deep. I didn't want to be the guy who gave up, who let a bully win. But what if she was right? A few days later, the HOA board announced an emergency meeting. I knew it was going to be bad, because Karen had posted the notice herself on every single mailbox, like it was some kind of royal decree. The community center was packed that evening. People filled every chair, leaned against the walls, some even stood outside the windows trying to hear. The air buzzed with tension, like static before a storm. Karen walked in last, of course, always had to make an entrance. Dressed in a crisp navy blazer, clipboard in hand, lips pursed like she was about to lecture a room full of children. She tapped the microphone. "Good evening, neighbors. Thank you for attending on such short notice. I know many of you have concerns about the new fee structure, and I'm here to address them." Before she could go further, a man in the back shouted, "You mean defend your power trip?" The crowd erupted in murmurs and a few claps. Karen raised her hand. "Please, this is not the time for theatrics. The HOA suffered a significant financial loss due to the lawsuit against us. The increase is necessary to keep our community thriving." I couldn't stay quiet. I stood up. "Thriving? People are losing their homes. Do you even care about the families you're forcing out?" Karen's eyes locked on mine, cold and sharp. "Mr. Parker, I understand change is difficult, but rules are rules. The HOA is a collective responsibility. If you can't keep up with your obligations, perhaps this isn't the right place for your family." That was it. That line again. "This isn't the right place for your family." The way she said it wasn't just policy, it was personal. After the meeting, a small group of neighbors gathered around me in the parking lot. Richard, the father of 3, looked furious. "She's bleeding us dry. My wife's already talking about moving, but damn it, I don't want to give her the satisfaction." Another neighbor, a woman named Sandra, nodded. "She's drunk on power. Someone needs to stand up to her." I felt all their eyes on me, and I realized they were looking for someone to lead the fight. The problem was, I wasn't sure I had the strength. That weekend, things escalated again. I came home from running errands to find a bright orange violation notice taped to my front door. In bold black letters it read, "Unapproved vehicle parking. This is your second warning. Fines will apply." I blinked in disbelief. Second warning? There had never been a first. And the car they were talking about? My wife's sedan, parked in her own driveway. I stormed inside, crumpling the notice in my fist. My wife looked at me nervously. "Another one?" she asked. "Yeah, this time it's about your car. Apparently, it's an unapproved vehicle, whatever the hell that means." She sighed. "She's targeting us. It's obvious." And she was right. But Karen wasn't just targeting us with letters anymore. She was dragging the police into it. That night, just after 9 p.m., there was another knock on the door. My heart sank. When I opened it, the same 2 officers from before were standing there. "Sir, we received another complaint, this time about a potential disturbance, noise issues." I nearly laughed. "Noise issues? It's 9 o'clock. My kids are literally in bed." They shrugged, apologetic. "Look, we have to respond to every call. We know what's going on here, but unless it crosses into harassment, our hands are tied." I looked past them, and sure enough, there she was again. Karen, standing across the street with her arms crossed, watching, smiling. That was the moment I realized she wasn't just trying to make life hard, she was trying to break us. The next day, I started documenting everything. Every notice, every letter, every complaint. I took photos, saved emails, even recorded audio during board meetings. If Karen was going to play dirty, I was going to build a case. But even as I collected evidence, the pressure at home kept mounting. My kids asked why the police kept coming. My wife cried quietly at night when she thought I was asleep. And me, I felt like a man standing on shifting ground, watching cracks spread through the foundation of the life I had built. One evening, after another sleepless night, I made a decision. I'm not backing down, I told my wife. If Karen wants a fight, she's going to get one. But I'm not letting her bully us out of this home. She looked at me, eyes red but determined. Then we fight together. And so I prepared. I reached out to a lawyer friend for advice. He told me HOAs could be challenged, but it would be costly and time-consuming. Still, he encouraged me to keep documenting everything. At the same time, I started talking to neighbors, quietly at first, in hushed conversations on sidewalks, at the park, over coffee. Slowly, a group began to form, people who were tired of Karen's reign of terror. We called ourselves the Backyard Alliance, because that's where most of our secret meetings happened, in each other's backyards, away from Karen's watchful eyes. We weren't just fighting fees anymore. We were fighting for our homes, our dignity, our right to live without fear. But as much as we planned, as much as we rallied, none of us knew just how far Karen was willing to go. Because one night, everything boiled over. It was a Friday evening. We were having a small gathering, just a few families from the Alliance, sharing food, venting frustrations, letting the kids play together. For the first time in weeks, I felt almost normal. Until the flashing lights showed up. 2 police cruisers pulled up in front of my house. Officers stepped out, hands on their belts, looking tense. My stomach dropped. One officer called out, "We've received multiple complaints about a large disruptive gathering, possibly involving alcohol and underage drinking." The crowd gasped. Someone whispered, "What? That's insane!" I stepped forward. "Officers, this is a family cookout. Kids are here, sure, but there's no alcohol, no noise violations. This is harassment." As I spoke, my eyes darted across the street, and there she was again, Karen, phone in hand, smirking. That was the moment I realized she wasn't just trying to make life hard. She was trying to break us. That night, as the last guests left, I stood in my driveway, staring at Karen's house. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from rage. This wasn't just war anymore. This was personal. And I swore to myself, one way or another, Karen was going to pay for what she was doing. By the time the cookout incident happened, it was clear. Our neighborhood wasn't a community anymore. It was a battlefield. Everywhere I went, you could feel the tension. People avoided eye contact, whispered behind closed doors, and picked sides, some openly supporting me and the families who were struggling, while others clung to Karen, either out of fear or because they actually believed in her twisted vision of order. The air felt different, heavy, like every friendly wave and smile had been replaced with suspicion and resentment. And it was all because of her. The very next morning, I walked out to get the mail and noticed something strange. My driveway had been chalked on, big letters scrawled across the pavement. "Pay your fees or leave." I froze, heart pounding in my chest. My kids who were playing in the yard came running over. "Daddy, what's that say?" I scrambled to cover it with my feet. Nothing, just some kids messing around. But they weren't stupid. They saw the look on my face. That's when I realized this was bigger than Karen. She had managed to poison the minds of other neighbors, turning them against us. At the next HOA meeting, that division was on full display. The room was packed again, voices rising even before the meeting started. Karen sat smugly at the front, banging her little gavel like she was running a courtroom. "Order! Order, please!" she shouted. Richard stood up first. His voice shook with fury. "We're not paying another dime until we see where the money is going. You can't just double the fees and expect us to roll over." A man 2 rows behind him barked back, "If you can't afford it, then move. Some of us care about keeping this neighborhood respectable." That sparked a shouting match. People were on their feet, jabbing fingers, yelling over each other. The air felt like it was going to explode. I stood up, raising my voice over the chaos. "This is exactly what she wants. Look around you. Neighbors fighting neighbors, families turning on each other. Meanwhile, Karen is sitting there watching it happen." All eyes turned to her. For a moment, just a moment, I thought maybe she'd back down. But instead she smiled. "Mr. Parker," she said sweetly, "you speak of community, but all I see is a man trying to stir rebellion. You're destabilizing the neighborhood. Perhaps the board should consider whether your family is truly a good fit here." My blood boiled. "You don't get to decide who belongs and who doesn't." "Actually," she said, adjusting her pearl necklace, "that's exactly what I get to decide." The room erupted again, and in that chaos I realized something chilling. Karen had no intention of backing down. If anything, she was pushing harder. The weeks that followed were like living under siege. Every day brought a new violation notice, a trash bin left out too long, grass half an inch too tall, even a fine for having a basketball hoop in the driveway, something dozens of families had. But strangely, it was always my house being targeted first. My wife tried to stay strong, but I caught her crying more often. The kids grew quieter, their laughter replaced with worried questions. "Are we going to have to move? Why does Mrs. Mitchell hate us?" I had no answers, and that tore me apart. One night, Richard called me. His voice was shaky. "Man, they came after me today. I got hit with 3 violations in one day. 3! For stuff that makes no sense. I think she's spreading this. Anyone who supports you, she's going to punish." My gut twisted. Karen wasn't just after me. She was after anyone who stood with me. That's when I knew the alliance wasn't safe anymore. We had to step carefully or she'd crush us one by one. But as careful as we tried to be, Karen struck again, and this time it was worse than ever. It was late on a Thursday night. We just put the kids to bed when flashing red and blue lights filled the street. I opened the door to see 2 police cruisers, lights flashing, radios crackling. My stomach dropped. An officer approached. "Sir, we received a report of a domestic disturbance at this residence." My wife gasped. "What? That's insane! We were just putting our kids to bed." The officer frowned. "We take all calls seriously. Mind if we step inside?" I felt my face burn with humiliation. Neighbors were peeking through blinds, stepping onto porches, whispering. The kids padded downstairs, sleepy-eyed and scared. "Daddy, what's happening?" my youngest asked. I kneeled, forcing a smile I didn't feel. "It's okay, sweetheart, just a mistake." The officers quickly realized the call was bogus and apologized and left. But the damage was done. Karen had crossed another line. She was weaponizing the police against us, and I couldn't take it anymore. The next morning, I marched straight to the police station with my stack of evidence. "Look," I told the officer at the desk, slamming down a folder, "this is harassment. We've had multiple bogus calls, constant harassment from the HOA president. I want this on record." The officer flipped through the papers, nodding. "You've got a solid case building here. We can't stop her from filing complaints, but we can log everything. If it continues, it'll become a clear pattern of harassment. At that point, we can take action." It wasn't the victory I wanted, but it was something, a crack in Karen's armor. Meanwhile, the neighborhood continued to fracture. At school drop-off, some parents wouldn't look at me anymore. Others whispered encouragement, slipping me notes like, "Keep fighting." One evening, Sandra knocked on my door. She looked nervous. "Be careful," she whispered. "I overheard Karen talking to a few board members. She wants to push for foreclosure on your house if you miss a single payment." My blood ran cold. "She can't do that." Sandra shook her head. "She thinks she can." That night, my wife and I sat at the kitchen table again, just like the night we got the first letter, the same letter that had started this nightmare. She looked at me with tired, red-rimmed eyes. "I can't do this anymore. The kids can't either. We can't live with the police knocking on our door every week. We can't live under constant threats." I reached across the table, grabbing her hands. "I know, but if we walk away now, she wins. She'll do this to the next family, and the next. Someone has to stop her." Tears welled up in her eyes. "But at what cost, Daniel? At what cost?" Her words echoed in my head long after she went to bed. At what cost? I didn't know anymore. The next day, another letter arrived. This one wasn't a violation. It was worse. It was a summons to appear in court. Karen, backed by the HOA, was suing me for unpaid fees. It said I was delinquent even though I had the receipts to prove I'd paid every dime. She was fabricating the charges. I stood there in my kitchen, letter trembling in my hands, as rage and fear surged through me. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was war in the courts. And for the first time, I wondered if Karen might actually succeed in destroying us. When I held that summons in my hands, it felt like the floor dropped out beneath me. I had braced myself for fines, for harassment, for endless police visits. But court? That was something else entirely. Karen had taken the fight to another level, and she knew exactly what she was doing. The morning after receiving the letter, I sat in the kitchen staring at my coffee, my hands trembling so much I could barely hold the cup. My wife paced the floor, her nerves unraveling. "This is it, Daniel," she said, voice cracking. "She's going to take everything. She's going to drag us through court until we can't pay anymore." I shook my head. "Not if I can prove she's lying. I've got the receipts. Every payment, every check cleared. I've documented everything." She stopped pacing and looked at me, her eyes full of both fear and hope. "Then we fight. We fight her with everything we have." I nodded, but inside, I wasn't so sure. Because fighting in court isn't about who's right. It's about who can twist the rules the hardest. And Karen, she was a master of that. The 2 weeks leading up to court were torture. Karen doubled her harassment campaign. Every morning I found another violation notice taped to my door. Grass too long, trash bins improperly stored, fence not painted to regulation shade. One afternoon, I even found her standing on the sidewalk outside my house with a tape measure, crouched down like she was inspecting the length of my hedge. I stormed outside. "What the hell are you doing on my property?" She stood, unbothered, brushing off her hands. "Just ensuring compliance, Mr. Parker. Wouldn't want any surprises before court, would we?" I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. "This is harassment." She smiled, that same smug, perfect smile. "No, Daniel, this is enforcement. There's a difference." I wanted to explode, but I forced myself back inside, because one slip, one outburst, and she'd twist it against me in court. The day of the hearing, my stomach felt like it was full of stones. My wife sat beside me in the car, her hand gripping mine so tight it hurt. When we walked into the courthouse, Karen was already there. Of course she was. She sat at the opposite table, dressed like she was attending a royal gala. Perfect hair, perfect pearls, perfect smug smile. She didn't even acknowledge me. She just whispered to her attorney, a sharp-suited man who looked like he'd sold his soul years ago. When the judge called the case, Karen's lawyer launched into a speech. "Your Honor, the defendant, Mr. Parker, has failed to meet his HOA obligations, accruing a debt of over $3,000 in unpaid fees and penalties. We are asking the court to approve foreclosure proceedings if payment is not made immediately." My heart raced. Foreclosure. They were going straight for the kill. When it was my turn, I stood, voice shaking but loud enough. "Your Honor, that is a lie. I have paid every single fee. I have bank statements, canceled checks, and receipts that prove it. This isn't about money, it's about harassment." I handed over my binder. The judge flipped through it, his brow furrowing. He looked unimpressed with Karen's lawyer. "This will require further review," he finally said. "Until then, no foreclosure action will be taken." A wave of relief washed over me. But it was thin. This wasn't a win, it was just a pause. Karen didn't even look fazed. In fact, as we left the courtroom, she leaned toward me and whispered, "You won't win, Daniel. I'll bury you in paperwork. I'll drag you back here again and again until you're bled dry. People like you don't belong here." Her words stuck to me like poison. The harassment didn't stop. In fact, it got worse. That very evening, I came home to find a police cruiser parked outside my house. The officer approached me. "Sir, we received a report that your property may be in violation of safety codes. Something about a hazardous condition in your backyard?" I laughed bitterly. "What now? The swing set again?" He shrugged. "We have to follow up." And sure enough, Karen was standing across the street, watching, phone in hand. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march across that street and tell her to her face that she was destroying lives. But I knew that's exactly what she wanted. One outburst, and she'd twist it into another complaint. So, instead, I swallowed my rage. But that night, as I sat in the dark with my wife, I whispered, "She's not going to stop until we're out." Word of the court case spread quickly through the neighborhood. Some neighbors avoided me completely, afraid of being targeted themselves, but others, they rallied. Richard showed up at my door with a thick envelope. "These are copies of my violation notices. Dates, pictures, everything. She's targeting me too. If you need more evidence against her, use this." Sandra joined in. "I've been keeping notes. Every time she patrols the neighborhood, every time she stops in front of your house, I'll testify if I have to." Their support meant everything. But it also made me nervous. Karen had already started targeting them. But what if I dragged them down further? Still, a fire was building inside me. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was everyone's. The next HOA meeting was chaos from the start. Karen sat at the head of the table like a queen on her throne, but this time the crowd wasn't silent. Richard first spoke. "We're tired of this, Karen. The violations, the bogus fees, the police calls, you're abusing your power." The room erupted with cheers and claps. Karen slammed her gavel. "Order. I will not tolerate insubordination." I stood up. "You're not a dictator, Karen. You don't get to rule this community with fear. You work for the homeowners, not the other way around." Her face turned red, her smile fading into a snarl. "Sit down, Mr. Parker, or I'll have you removed." I didn't sit. No, you're done silencing us." People cheered again. For the first time, Karen looked rattled. That's when she snapped. "Fine. If you want to make this personal, let's make it personal. Mr. Parker is delinquent on his fees. He is being sued by this HOA. He is a disgrace to this community." Gasps filled the room. She had just outed my private legal battle in front of everyone. I clenched my fists. "That's a lie, and you know it. I've paid everything. You're fabricating charges to push us out." "Enough," she screamed. "Officers, remove him." And just like that, 2 police officers, who had been stationed at the back, started walking toward me. The room went silent. My wife grabbed my arm, eyes wide with terror. I raised my hands, my voice shaking. "This is harassment. Everyone here knows it." The officers hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Finally, one of them said, "Ma'am, we're not removing him. This is a civil meeting, not a criminal matter." The crowd erupted again, this time on my side. People shouted at Karen, booed, demanded she step down. For the first time, Karen's control cracked. But cracks don't mean collapse. Not yet. The next week, another letter arrived, another summons, another court date. She was making good on her promise, burying me in paperwork. And worse, the police kept coming. Noise complaints, safety violations, parking disputes. At one point, an officer apologized to me, shaking his head. "Sir, off the record, she's abusing the system, but until it's classified as harassment in court, we're tied." That night, I sat on the porch staring at the stars, feeling like I was drowning. My wife sat beside me, silent for a long time. Finally, she whispered, "How much longer can we survive this?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know. But deep down, I knew one thing. The final showdown was coming. Karen was pushing harder, faster, more recklessly. She thought she was untouchable. And people who think they're untouchable, they always make a mistake. I just had to be ready when she did. The week after that explosive HOA meeting felt like walking through a war zone. Neighbors whispered in the streets, some quietly cheering me on, others nervously avoiding me. The community was divided down the middle, half terrified of Karen's wrath, half emboldened by the cracks they'd seen in her control. But Karen doubled down. She wasn't rattled. If anything, she was more vicious. She'd tasted resistance, and now she wanted to crush it completely. The first sign came on Monday morning. I woke to the sound of pounding on my door. When I opened it, 2 uniformed officers were waiting, their cruisers idling at the curb with lights flashing. "Mr. Parker?" one asked. "Yes," I said cautiously. "We received a report that you've been threatening members of the HOA board with violence." My jaw nearly hit the ground. "What? That's insane. I've never threatened anyone." The officer flipped through his notes. "According to the report, you made direct threats at the last meeting. Something about, taking matters into your own hands?" I stared at him in disbelief. "That's not what I said. Everyone in that room heard me. This is Karen twisting my words." The officer's expression softened. "Look, sir, we have to check on every report. We're not here to arrest you. We're just documenting. But I'd suggest you keep your distance from her." I clenched my fists at my sides. "She's the one harassing me. Why aren't you suggesting that to her?" The officer sighed. "Because she knows how to work the system." And just like that, they left. Another mark on my record, another seed of doubt planted. By midweek, it escalated again. This time, it wasn't just police at my door. It was Child Protective Services. They'd received an anonymous call claiming my kids were being neglected, that the home was unsafe. I felt the blood drain from my face as I let the caseworker inside. She walked through every room, checked every corner, asked my children questions that broke my heart. When she left, she shook my hand sympathetically. "I'm sorry you're going through this. We can tell this was a malicious report. But be aware, sir, if we get multiple calls, even false ones, it can trigger mandatory follow-ups." Karen. It had to be Karen. Who else would stoop so low as to drag my children into her vendetta? That night, my wife sobbed in my arms. "Daniel, this isn't just about us anymore. She's trying to destroy our whole family." I held her, silent, rage burning inside me. Karen had crossed a line. She wasn't just playing games with fees anymore. She was tearing at the very foundation of our lives. Friday night was the final straw. It started with a knock. Again, the police. "Noise complaint," the officer said. "Neighbors reported loud music coming from your property." I blinked in disbelief. "It's 9 p.m. The house is silent. The kids are asleep. You can check for yourself." The officer sighed, clearly tired of this routine. I figured as much, but we still have to log it. Before I could respond, another cruiser pulled up. 2 more officers got out, and behind them, stepping out of a black SUV with that smug smile plastered on her face, was Karen. "What are you doing here?" I demanded. She folded her arms. "As HOA president, I'm here to ensure community peace. Multiple neighbors have complained about you disturbing the neighborhood. I'm within my rights to observe the police investigation." My blood boiled. "You've orchestrated this. You're wasting police resources just to harass me." One of the officers glanced between us. "Ma'am, please step back. This is a police matter." But Karen wasn't backing down. She raised her voice so all the neighbors who had gathered outside could hear. "Mr. Parker is a menace to this community. He refuses to pay his fees, he threatens board members, he disturbs the peace, and now he's wasting taxpayer dollars with constant police involvement." The crowd murmured. Some nodded in agreement. Others shook their heads, disgusted. I could feel the eyes of my children peeking from the upstairs window, watching as their father was publicly humiliated. That's when I snapped. "Enough!" I shouted. "You've done nothing but lie and harass and bully. You're destroying lives, Karen. Do you even care what you're doing to people, to families, to kids?" The street went silent. Karen's smile faltered for a second, but then she recovered. "Officer, did you hear that? He's threatening me again." The officer rubbed his temples. "Ma'am, that's not a threat. That's a man who's had enough." For the first time, Karen looked unsure. But I wasn't finished. I turned to the crowd. "How many of you have gotten violation notices for ridiculous reasons? How many of you have been fined for nonsense? How many of you live in fear of her measuring your lawn or photographing your house or dragging you into court?" Murmurs spread through the crowd. Hands went up. People started nodding, whispering, speaking to each other. Karen's face turned red. "This is slander. This is an organized attack against me." "No, Karen," Richard's voice boomed from the back of the crowd. He stepped forward, documents in hand. "This is the truth, and I've got the paperwork to prove it." He handed the officer a folder, copies of dozens of violation notices, fines, harassment letters. Sandra stepped up too, holding her own folder. "We've all been documenting this. We've had enough." The officer took the papers, flipping through them slowly. Then he looked up at Karen. "Ma'am, this looks like a pattern, a very concerning one." She stammered. "They're lying. They're all conspiring against me." But the crowd wasn't on her side anymore. People shouted from the back. She fined me for leaving my car in the driveway. She called the cops because my dog barked once. She tried to evict my elderly mother. The tide had turned. Karen, however, wasn't giving up without a fight. She raised her gavel. Yes, she had actually brought her HOA gavel and slammed it against her palm. "This meeting is adjourned. You will all pay the price for this insubordination." The absurdity of her words hung in the air. One of the officers finally stepped forward. "Ma'am, that's enough. You need to calm down. You've created a disturbance here tonight." She widened her eyes. "Are you arresting me for doing my job?" "No," the officer said flatly, "but if this continues, we'll have to consider charges of harassment and misuse of emergency services." The crowd erupted in cheers. For the first time, Karen's authority was publicly challenged by the very system she'd been abusing. But as I stood there, watching her retreat to her SUV, a chill ran down my spine. Because I knew Karen, and I knew she wasn't finished. If she was dangerous before, she was going to be absolutely reckless now. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the porch until dawn, replaying everything in my mind. The humiliation, the lies, the police, the crowd finally seeing her for who she really was. We were close, so close to ending this nightmare, but I knew there was still one more battle ahead. Karen wasn't going down quietly. She was going to make one last move. And when she did, everything would come to a head. The morning after that chaotic scene with the police and the neighbors, I woke up to a strange stillness. For the first time in weeks, Karen wasn't pacing outside my house. No violation notices taped to the door. No patrols with her clipboard. No officers pulling up with headlights flashing. It almost felt wrong. My wife noticed it too. "Do you think she finally realized she's gone too far?" I shook my head. "No, Karen doesn't quit. She's planning something." And I was right. By noon, I found out what it was. Another letter, this time hand-delivered by a courier. It wasn't a violation notice. It was worse. Foreclosure proceedings. Despite the judge's earlier decision to pause, Karen had filed a new motion with updated evidence, claiming I had ignored multiple warnings and failed to make payments for months. My heart dropped as I scanned the pages. She'd forged documents, backdated violation notices, and even attached copies of checks that she claimed had bounced. Except they weren't my checks. The signature wasn't even mine. She'd crossed into outright fraud. I called my attorney immediately. He skimmed the papers and swore under his breath. "This is serious. She's not just harassing you anymore. She's committing crimes." But proving it is going to take time. Time I didn't have. That evening, the police came again. But this time, they weren't here for me. 2 cruisers pulled up, lights flashing, and officers headed straight across the street to Karen's house. The neighborhood gathered instantly, drawn like moths to the glow of those flashing lights. Karen stormed onto her porch, shrieking, "What is the meaning of this? I am the HOA president. You can't just barge onto my property." One of the officers held up a paper. "We have a warrant, ma'am. We've received multiple reports of fraud, harassment, and misuse of emergency services. We need to ask you some questions." The crowd gasped. Karen's face twisted with fury. "Fraud? Harassment? You fools! I run this community. These people are liars. They're conspiring against me." But the officers didn't back down. "Ma'am, calm down. If you cooperate, this will go smoothly." I stood at the edge of the crowd, my heart pounding. Part of me felt vindicated. Justice, finally, after months of torture. But another part of me was terrified, because Karen wasn't the type to go quietly. And I was right. She shoved one of the officers, screaming, "Get off my property! You have no authority here!" That was it. They moved in, restraining her as she kicked and thrashed. The crowd erupted, some cheering, others filming on their phones. My kids, watching from the window, saw the woman who had tormented us being dragged away in handcuffs. For the first time in a long time, I felt hope. But the relief didn't last, because Karen wasn't done. The very next morning, after posting bail, she returned, and she came back angrier than ever. She stood in my front yard screaming at the top of her lungs, "This isn't over, Parker. You think you've won, but I'll take everything from you. You hear me? Everything." Neighbors tried to intervene. Richard stepped forward. "Karen, stop. You've lost. Just let it go." She whirled at him. "Shut up. You're all traitors." Sandra pulled out her phone, recording. "Go ahead, Karen. Keep digging your own grave." Karen lunged toward her, but before she could get close, sirens wailed again. The police, already on alert, arrived within minutes. This time they didn't hesitate. They arrested her on the spot for trespassing, harassment, and violating the conditions of her bail. That was the last time Karen Mitchell set foot in our neighborhood. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings. Investigators uncovered a mountain of evidence, fabricated documents, falsified complaints, even emails where Karen bragged about weeding out families she didn't like. She wasn't just targeting me. She'd been targeting everyone. By the time it was over, Karen faced multiple charges. The HOA board voted her out unanimously, and a new president was elected. Someone fair, someone reasonable. The fees dropped back down, the violation notices stopped, the police calls ended, and slowly, painfully, life returned to normal. But normal didn't feel the same anymore. My wife and I sat on the porch one evening, watching our kids play in the yard. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. For the first time in months, there was peace. She leaned against me and whispered, "We made it." I nodded, but my voice was heavy. "Yeah, but it cost us so much." Because even though we'd won, the scars remained. The sleepless nights, the constant fear, the way our children flinched every time they saw a police car. Karen had left a mark on us that wouldn't fade overnight. I told myself I should feel triumphant, but what I felt instead was reflective. HOAs were supposed to protect communities, but in the wrong hands, they became weapons. Karen used hers like a sword, cutting down anyone who dared oppose her. And for a while, she almost succeeded. But in the end, it wasn't just me who brought her down. It was all of us. The neighbors who stood up, the officers who finally saw through the lies, the people who refused to stay silent. That's the lesson I carry with me now. Tyrants fall when people stand together. The last time I ever heard about Karen was from a local news article. It described her standing in front of the courthouse, head down, surrounded by reporters. The headline read, "Former HOA President Faces Charges of Fraud and Harassment." I clipped that article and tucked it away in my binder, the same binder I'd once used to prove my innocence. Because to me, it wasn't just news, it was proof that no matter how powerful someone thinks they are, no matter how untouchable they act, the truth always catches up. Today, when I walk through the neighborhood, it feels different, lighter, freer. Kids ride bikes down the street without fear of being cited for noise violations. Families gather in their yards without looking over their shoulders. And when I pass by the old HOA office, now run by a kinder board, I smile. Because we survived, Karen. And though the scars remain, so does the lesson. Never let fear silence you.